there will be no real non-controlled currency in the world.
We're coming for you, banks.
It's an exciting time to be involved in Bitcoin Cash at the moment.
During that whole war of Lightning versus big blocks, like, were we the bad guys? Were we the ones that weren't listening?
Fundamentally, we believe in markets, transparency, and tokenization.
Come on, you gotta come stronger than that, you know, like...
Hello and welcome back to the Bitcoin Cash podcast following Bitcoin Cash on its rise to global reserve currency. This is episode number 98, CBDC Rollout and Resistance, featuring Charlie from Resist CBDC. Today is Saturday, the 11th of November, 2023. I'm your host, Jeremy. Jet is doing the producing and monitoring us as we're now live on Twitter and also on YouTube as well as Twitch. So we're going big from now on across every platform. And before we get started today, I just have a quick announcement, which is flipstarter.bitcoincashpodcast.com. We're running our third Flipstarter. We launched it on the last episode. A few people donated. Cheers to that. But we're way behind the target, which was a bit more ambitious because we got so much positive feedback on the previous ones, but it is definitely in need of some donations. So if you've been enjoying the show and you don't want to hear me find some sponsors and then rattle them off for 2 minutes at the start of every episode, now's your chance. Donate to the Flipstarter, flipstarter.bitcoincashpodcast.com. Right, let's get on with it. So today, our guest is Charlie, who is a digital rights activist, advocate, I guess, with resistcbdc.com. Welcome to the show, Charlie. How did you get into resisting CBDCs?
Just trying to do my part to resist the pedophiles establishing the New World Order through the United Nations and the World Economic Forum. No, like a few years ago, I just noticed in our own country, in the United States, like we weren't doing like normal politics. There was like something else going on. You could just kind of smell it. It just something didn't smell right. And so I started digging into it and finding other people that were speaking up about it. And the more I dug into it, the deeper down the rabbit hole, the bigger of the problem that I actually saw. And I started reading up on critical race theory. That was a thing like 3 years ago. I just listened to podcasts and whatnot and trying to find people who are making sense. And then, because I didn't want to take anybody's word for it, I bought books and papers and started reading them myself and trying to figure out, okay, who's actually speaking truth on this, and rather than just doing crap on the interweb. And tried talking about it, to people I knew, people at my kids' school and whatnot. And it was like, if you could explain basically race Marxism in like a couple of minutes. That wasn't hard. But if people didn't see how it was applied, it just didn't connect with them. You could try talking to them about like the 2S LGBTQIA movement, which actually has nothing to do with gay people or gay rights. It's a totally separate deal. You could talk about decolonizing curriculums and World Economic Forums and the 17 sustainability goals, and what people's eyes glazed over, right? But I found out that if you talk to people about digital surveillance, CBDCs, digital ID, cashless economy, people picked up on that in like a minute. And they understood it. They could look out at China. They could see it. And if you actually get into the whole Great Reset, what the United Nations and World Economic Forum, World Health Organization are trying to do, it's a move to like total global digital surveillance and control. And I'm like, this is the perfect intro. Because if you get people thinking about that, then whatever problems come in next year, like one of them, obvious, is mass immigration as being a door to push for biometric digital ID. If people are already thinking about digital surveillance, because I've already talked to them, then when something like that comes in, you don't have to try to meet up with them and explain to them how this issue and the next issue and the next issue are all part of the same movement. They're already seeing it. And you don't have to police people. You don't have to chase people around. You can just honestly trust people to act in their own best interest.
Right. So this stuff with critical race theory that you started on, I'm not personally, obviously, any kind of expert in that matter, but I am aware of it because it has been a thing that has kind of come up in sort of academia, right? And probably in a long, arc, maybe from feminism in the 70s, through to where we are today in the 2020s. So I don't know at what point things really started to kind of go downhill, you might say, on that arc, right? But it does seem to have then, as a general precept, maybe filtered its way out into the Western academia, specifically universities in America, in the UK, in Australia, that's having been at university in Australia, not too long ago, that's more like speaking my language, and you can see the influence of that in some parts of academia. Is that the root of the problem in your mind, or is that like the first in a set of symptoms, or what's happening there?
That's a good question. I look at critical theory. Again, queer theory is a branch of that. That's the Q in 2SLGBTQIA, which is a fake acronym, by the way. The critical race theory is just doing critical theory applied to race. And if you look at critical theory in general, it's just kind of like a jackhammer. It's just meant to break the existing society. All critical theory is activism for Marxism. All the critical theorists say this, going back to like Max Horkheimer in like the 30s, coming out of the Frankfurt School in Frankfurt, Germany, the Goethe Institute for Social Research. At its core, it's fundamentally like a cult religion that exists to break down the existing order of society, built on the premise that everything that exists deserves to perish. That was from Goethe, one of Marx's favorite lines, right? So the utopian condition, heaven on earth, already exists. It's just kind of covered on with scale and rust and dirt and debris that has to be stripped away. So what you see is, in terms of critical race theory, queer theory, decolonization, a lot of the movements that you're seeing right now, they're really just a way to break down the existing society. And so the thing that you do to break down the United States is going to be a little different from the thing you do to break down UK, Australia, Canada, France, whatever. Behind it all is just a desire to break everything. And that's kind of the cult religion part of it. The part where I don't really know how to answer this is, you take somebody like Bill Gates, who's big into pushing all this digital surveillance. Is he just pushing a pragmatic power grab, or is he actually started part of some like cultish religion? Like people like Klaus and Yuval Harari, they seem like they're kind of cultist to me. I mean, I've never talked to them, obviously, but they seem like they're part of like the one world transhumanist cult side of this, when, I don't know, maybe Xi Jinping and Bill Gates just want to see the West commit suicide. So I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, somewhat. Like, and this is where I think, we're in sort of a very gray area here, right? Because I think people, like, I'm listening to what you're saying, but I can imagine, and even most of my listeners, I think, will be quite serious about what you're saying. But I can imagine other people who are maybe not with as much context, or maybe as ideologically sort of aligned with where this is going, kind of trying to write any of this off as like conspiracy theories or anything like that. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit to, do you see this, like, you got to think, how do things manifest at the practical level, right? So for instance, these people who are in academia, who are getting a bit confused with all these weird ideas of that there's a big victim hierarchy, and they're always trying to sort themselves to the bottom to, gain status or power within their sort of little domain, the victim Olympics type of idea, right? That's not necessarily related, except indirectly, to some worldwide like push in one direction or another. That might just be individual people getting caught up in this sort of ideological tide that they are somehow, naively getting caught up in, right? And so then when you say breaking down different societies, that could be, like you said, maybe some kind of overall targeted movement, or it could just be a part of geopolitics, right? So like China and Russia are definitely interested in the US kind of crumbling apart a bit, the same way the US is interested in those societies, maybe having a few problems along the way. And if they can stir that up, they will, right? So explain to me how you see things from that lens.
Well, there is a gigantic movement between different nation states in some manner attacking each other. A lot of the critical theory funded in the West is coming straight from China. They fund this through like the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Health and their health equity and health justice movement. The Chans were, I think it's Robbie Chan, were Chinese people, and you dump $300 million, $500 million into Harvard. Harvard's going to teach what you want them to teach, and it's just a way of subverting, what used to be a very prestigious university. Everything I read now is that Harvard's just gone downhill, and everybody knows that, and no one cares if you have a Harvard degree anymore. So yeah, there is absolutely the global politics. I think probably what maybe to leapfrog your question here is that I think to call this a division of the United States versus China versus UK versus France or Israel, or however you want to divide this up among nation states, I think that's a false division. I think in large part we see borders on a map and a flag and a national anthem. It seems to me that the people behind the scenes don't divide the world up that way. What you get is kind of convergence interest between, like, say, the deep state in the United States, our intelligence community, which doesn't necessarily serve the interest of the United States. They kind of serve the interest of themselves. In addition to, I've been reading on this more recently in conjunction with other intelligence communities, with central banks, with global organized crime. And so a big part of this that what I'm seeing and kind of digging into is it looks like there are the puppet masters behind the scenes that we don't see, kind of pulling all of our strings, trying to pit, China versus America, and it's all the Chinese are bad, or Israel versus Gaza, or Russians versus Ukrainians, or whatever it is, just to create that chaos and that conflict. So when we look out, we're fighting with each other because black and white or gay and straight or, whatever it is within our nations, creating that chaos, breaking that social cohesion. But the actual boundaries and borders we should be looking for are the puppet masters pulling the strings versus normal people on the street in tons of countries who are happy just going about their life doing their thing.
Yeah, I mean, they do say that every war is a banker's war, right? Like the arms dealers, for instance, they don't care who wins, who lives and who dies, what borders get redrawn, completely irrelevant. As long as the money is flowing to them, that's kind of a win in their books. And so I am sympathetic, maybe, I don't know if that's even a strong enough word, but I'm inclined towards any kind of perspective on global politics and on just the state of the world today, which has at least some acknowledgement of the fact that there are certainly, and it's all just people, right? There's no like aliens from another planet, or that's a separate discussion, but there are people who are powerful with a lot of money and a lot of resources, and they've got all day to kind of cook up things and move things in their direction, as we saw obviously with the Twitter files, right? When that came out, and for a long time, people had been protesting on Twitter saying this is manipulated and it's censored, and people are getting banned for these ideas and those ideas, and it was all no, that's definitely not happening. Of course, afterwards, once all the internal files came out and stuff, it was proven that the government had direct links into Twitter, asking them to censor things on their behalf, and so on and so forth. So I'm, I do like this line of thinking, but where I lose the thread of it is you've got to be very careful not to just turn it into like them, a vague them. So could you dig in a bit more on that?
Well, there is at some point kind of like a network of people behind this, and I compare it. If you look back at like World War II, right? The last major conflict, you had I think Chairman Mao was in position over in China. You had the Japanese emperor, you had Joseph Stalin, you had Roosevelt, you had Churchill, you had a person in charge of a nation that had boundaries, you had a military that had uniforms and a flag, and you could absolutely identify your enemy. And it was very clear. Like, you want to take out the Japanese emperor, we know where they live, we know who's in charge, we know what their flag is. And the way I've seen it, it's really evolved now that the people in charge, the people who are attacking, the they, them, so whatever that is, global central banks, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, like whoever it is, the people who are actually pulling the strings, are aware that if they were identified, it'd be a lot easier to take them out. So I think, like, I call them the puppet masters, so whoever they are. It's an individual people. I mean, at some point, if we had perfect information, we could fill a room with 100 people or 1,000 people and say, those guys right there. But I think the way that I say we're basically in World War III right now, but it's being waged in stealth such that you don't actually see, the attacks on your nation, whether that be through mass immigration, through inflation, through green energy. Green energy is not about the environment, by the way. And you don't actually see the people who are perpetrating this because, I think Klaus Schwab is married into the Rothschild family, but, the people in charge don't have YouTube accounts. They're not on Twitter. They don't make the Forbes 400 list. Like you never hear about it. That people who are actually in charge are hiding out, and that's on purpose.
Yeah, so I read a while ago this book, which is a very well known, especially in crypto circles, The Creature from Jekyll Island.
Oh yeah,
I don't know if you know that, right? And that's kind of one. Is that one strand of this, or is this the root of all of this? Because obviously, being the Bitcoin Cash podcast, that's an easy thing for us to point out and see. Okay, well, here's where a lot of the corruption started and is coming from. Control the money, control the world. What's that saying? I care not who writes a nation's laws if I control as central bank,
yeah.
Right? That's one way that I would attack this sort of somewhat generalized sense that the world is heading in the wrong direction. Is that the lens you see it through?
Well, that I would say is one of them. I mean, money, obviously, being if it's a store of wealth and medium of exchange, if you can control and manipulate the currency, then you have effect over just about every aspect of every person's life. And so you can get your tentacles. And part of the way that I look at this that I think is probably most helpful is to look at it as a cult, like a global cult religion. If you tie this back into original Marxism, because we hear a lot about Marx now, it's where there's just this one big, gigantic global hive mind, unity, everybody pulled together in oneness. Klaus Schwab talks about this with his neural implants and his AI-controlled, global brain. He's actually talked about it. That's not me. You go on YouTube, you find the clips and be like, that's Klaus Schwab talking about it. You can totally get into the cultish side of this, which I don't believe that, Xi Jinping or Ayatollah Khomeini are part of that, because they obviously have their own agenda. But for the time being, they can be frenemies with people who want to break the West. So, if you look at this as kind of cultish manipulation, with one of the key ways of doing that is through money. Coming down the road is through carbon credits, carbon wallets, green energy, because basically everything in our economy, anything you want to produce, anything you want to consume, anything you want to ship takes energy and has a carbon footprint. So again, now you have a way that somebody behind the scenes that's invisible, you don't see, are able to insert themselves in every aspect of every single person's life. Information, media is another way to do that.
Yeah. And I know you're a big fan of Jordan Peterson. You were talking to me a bit about him before the show, and he has just recently, and I haven't looked into the latest, all that's going on there. He's doing his ARC forum, whatever it is, the responsible citizenship kind of thing. And I watched about 5 minutes or 10 minutes of one of the talks they were doing there. It was in London. I didn't actually get a chance to go, but part of me, maybe the next one, or I don't know if you could even buy a ticket, right? But they had that.
From the limo to pick you up?
No, no, I was not on the VIP guest list, at least not yet. But
next year.
Yeah, well, that's right. I'm sure this is going to be an ongoing thing. He talks a lot, or at least, especially recently. I don't know so much in the past that he did, but he's come onto this idea of this kind of degrowth agenda. That a lot of the stuff that might be around energy or around population growth or so on is just kind of comes down to this fundamental understanding, at least in my view, that you can have a scarcity or an abundance mindset, right? If you believe that the world has limited resources and everybody's competing over them in this sort of state of nature type of thing, then it all just becomes I win at somebody else's loss,
right?
And
Zero sum.
it's hard. Yeah, it's hard to run a society like that, right? You can only run an effective, growing society over time if the majority of people, and especially the people with the most influence, are able to understand, as the foundation of economics, that you and I can make a trade and we can both come out better for it. So with new ideas, which is an infinite resource, right? We can always come up with new ideas. And in fact, the more people you have, the more ideas you can have, right? And more technology, you can raise the standard of living for everybody. But for that, you need to have a fundamentally positively geared perspective, right?
Yeah. So like free markets around the world, which is basically just free people. There's a reason why people who have some form of democracy, constitutional republic here in the United States, always goes with free markets, because it's just a matter of individual freedom, civil rights, where the governing authority is subservient to the individual. And our Constitution is explicitly to secure the rights of the individual. I'm not sure what English common law looks like. What we see coming out of like the World Economic Forum, and you know what the Club of Rome is? Limits to growth.
The what? No,
Club of Rome.
I don't know.
Oh, it goes back until I think 1972, 73. They published their book Limits to Growth. And Klaus Schwab, back when he established the World Economic Forum, I think it was called the European Economic Forum or European whatever, back in the 71, 72. He's been on this shtick for like 50 years now of we're all running out of resources. There's too many people on the planet. We're going to run out of oil by the 1970s, and we're going to run out of copper by the 1980s, and so on and so forth. And we haven't. Now, unfortunately, where Schwab is going with this is that they can identify a lot of problems, right? But their solutions suck. It's not that they aren't pointing out problems. At some point, we're going to hit peak oil, peak fossil fuels. Exactly is that 2010, 2020, 2030, at some point. You can't go in the last 50 years, go from like 3 billion people to 8 billion people on the planet and expect this is just going to keep, astronomically going up. I think I've heard the population is supposed to pop around 9, maybe 10 billion and then kind of taper off. So there are, absolutely problems out there, including, pollution in the ocean, pollution in the air, overfishing. The issue is that for 50 something years, Klaus and his Malthusian death cult, they've been wrong about every single prediction. And it just so turns out that the solution that they have for every problem is that they get to be in charge of everything, almost like they're, at the tip of a cult. They have to tell everyone what to do, and everyone else has to be impoverished with degrowth and their low carbon footprint. Had they been making accurate predictions for 50 years, I might take them more seriously. If their solution didn't, they didn't keep talking about depopulation, I might take them a little more seriously. So that's why I'm hoping like maybe Jordan Peterson, some of his, some of the people he's in contact with can actually come up with some like actual positive practical solution that, doesn't lead to some sort of dystopian hellhole.
Yes, and it is to me perhaps just the modern incarnation of the perpetual struggle between authoritarians and the sort of opposite, whether you call it, I don't know, I don't really want to say libertarians because that's not really the right word. That's associated wrongly, but just the opposite of authoritarians are not, essentially. And when you have that struggle all throughout history, it makes sense to me that you would clearly there's some part of human nature that has that wired into it. There's going to be a segment of the population that through nature or nurture comes to believe they want to be the top dog in control of everyone by coercive means if necessary, and another section of the population that just wants to be left alone. And clearly nature, evolution smarter than all of us, decided that there's benefits to both, right? If you had you couldn't necessarily even persist human society if you didn't have a few people that had that drive to get to the top. That's the same drive that creates technology and adventure and exploration and things like that as well too, competition. So it is a bit of a yin and a yang, perpetual cycle. But as we are here today, the relevant thing obviously comes down to CBDCs as a means of control, right? So as a result of so that's what I'm saying is it came from looking into this background and all these different, trends that you were concerned about in the world. You just happened to hit on that CBDCs was the one thing that people would really respond to, or why has that, because that's what your branding is and stuff like that. Why did that attract your attention more than any of these other, like you could have made it a more political thing or an energy thing?
BDCs again instead of wandering off into.
No, this is very interesting, right? I do like getting this background, but I'm just trying to piece it together for myself and for the viewers. How out of all of these things, CBDCs became the thing that you put in the branding and you put front and center?
Well, I just started, honestly, like I mentioned earlier, just reading a bunch of books, listening to podcasts, trying to see who's making sense of this. And then I'd go out there and I'd be talking to people. So what I'm doing now is probably the fourth or fifth iteration of what I was doing. Because overwhelmingly, the biggest problem I found, I live here in California, right? It's, California, it's not San Francisco and LA. It's not, drag queens, gay stuff everywhere. California's biggest economic product is agriculture. We're just a farming powerhouse. It's not all the tech stuff. So we have a whole lot of like normies just running around California. And I'm out there trying to talk to them and, relate to them and see where I can go with this and get people to wake up. Because the biggest problem I'm seeing is that the culture war is so stealth, and the language games are so stealth that people can't see them coming in until you learn to see how the manipulations are being worked. Diversity is not about diversity. Inclusion is not about inclusion. Equity is not about equity. These are all just very Orwellian language games. So when you're out there trying
hang on. Can you elaborate on that
Sure.
a little bit more? I sort of see where you're going with this, but just to be clear, what do you mean when you say that inclusion is not inclusion or diversity is not diversity?
So equity is going to be the most obvious one. That just means equality of outcome. And nowhere in the history of any living thing, anywhere on planet Earth throughout the history of time has equality of outcome ever occurred. That's the basis of evolution. So equity is a game for power, for who gets to decide who gets to be made equal. And the way that always turns out, that's just from each and everyone according to their ability, each and everyone according to their need. It's just only now it's not about need and ability, it's about equity.
Yes.
It's a power play. And as it turns out, whoever gets to decide what counts as equity gets to decide what to measure. And they'll measure something which supports the people that are supporting them or gives stuff to people that are supporting them, and it harms the people that oppose them. So if you get into critical theory, like the whole culture war, the whole language game, the postmodern side of that, diversity means you have to have authentic diversity. So you can't just have a token black person who shows up or a black conservative or a black Christian. They have to be a black person with the proper political, religious orientation. So diversity actually means uniformity of thought. You have to have the proper perspective. And they happen to be black, or they happen to be gay, or they happen to be woman, or they happen to be pick your thing. It's about going into an organization, promoting diversity, and bringing in people that have the proper political, religious orientation. Inclusion is the flip side of that. So anybody who opposes the new political, religious orientation isn't making it an inclusive organization, and you purge them, push them out. So diversity means uniformity of thought. Inclusion means purges. And this is the game. You just cycle this through a police department, military, school, whatever, and eventually you end up with all the people in core positions have the same mindset.
Yeah.
And until someone sees it and goes, "Oh, this is a manipulation," you're just picking people who all think the same. You don't care if they're black or gay or old or young. It doesn't matter. You're going to pick an identity category and say, "Oh, that person's being authentically whatever it is," because they want to, say, disrupt and dismantle the intersecting systems of oppression. I don't know if you've heard some of that language before.
I haven't heard that language before. I mean, when you're saying what you just explained, it just rang through to me in terms of George Orwell has his famous book Animal Farm, right? And the pigs there, they take over control with the slogan, "All animals are equal, but some are more equal than others," right?
Yeah.
And that's right. And the pigs are the ones who are more equal, and they end up at the top, and they end up becoming the masters of the farm, replacing the humans, right? So it's a similar that's sort of the process that you're describing that we've seen in society, and you can also see examples of that with obviously now maybe you and I are not maybe the best the best poster child for this point of view, but there are people like, for instance, Vivek Ramaswamy at the moment running for US political office. He spends a lot of his time saying, I don't want to be seen as the token ethnic person. Like the fact that you are even framing things in that way is not an advantage to me. It's actually sort of discriminatory against that. You can't just see me as Vivek, from that you have to try and, like if he talks to left-wing media, they try and put him in those boxes or frame him in that way. And he's saying, no, the true sort of strength in diversity is when people can be recognized for who they are, not as the representative of some assigned beliefs according to a box that they've been put in, right?
Right. So here in the United States, I mean, there's a giant manipulation going on. Like we mentioned, the manipulation targeted at the UK is going to be different from the manipulation targeted at the United States. But if you actually dig into it, I live here in California, and the largest ethnic group is actually Hispanic. Like Europeans are actually in second place. And you go into polls of Hispanic people, the majority of them don't want illegal immigration. They want a secure border. If you go into polling for Black people, the majority of them don't like all this super duper affirmative action because most people just want to be treated like a normal person and get by on their merits. What you get is in the media, out of 330 million people in the United States, you can find a handful of chunderheads who are doing something terrible and put that on the screen. Or you can find the token Black, gay, intersectional, and put that person on the screen and be like, oh, this person speaks for all Blacks or all whites or all. If you step back and you actually go look, okay, what's the data? What's actually going on here? And you actually look at polling throughout the years, you find a really common pattern that most people are pretty chill and most people don't like these stupid games. It's the tail wagging the dog, honestly, but throughout the Western world.
Yeah, exactly. And so now we're getting to a point where there's been a significant shift in the media landscape, partially as a response to that, I would posit, if these things go through cycles, right? So maybe YouTube 10 or 15 years ago was far more sort of open than it is now. It's far more controlled and locked down than it was. But even in the state that it is, it's still much easier for people to find, such alternative media or podcasts or whatever on there with huge reach that are able to push back against the television networks and so on, and in fact have probably largely surpassed them, certainly in terms of relevance in the conversation, but maybe also, in audience size and in visibility and, attractiveness to advertisers and so on, right? And then, but now the control is coming onto those things more and more firmly, right? And there will have to be a next step in the game. Do you have any thoughts about the media element of all of this?
It's absolutely the case. So the way I see it is anytime you get an organization, an institution, anything that builds up like a store of wealth, you can talk about a brand new train line, a bunch of silos full of grain, or more recently, that would be kind of like the classical Marxist perspective. More recently, you could say the trust that people had in CNN or the openness that was YouTube, that gets co-opted and subverted and controlled to start pushing a message. So at the core of all this is, if you go back far enough, we're into the 18th century, it goes back to blank slatism, where the world could be anything it wanted to be. There is no essence to germ. There is no thing in your brain that's just part of who you are. Everything about you is part of the social construction. And you kind of see this language carry through from old school Marxism, vulgar Marxism, into the postmodernism. So if you get into the cult aspect of this, the society can be made anything you want it to be. You just have to start programming people with the proper message and at the same time erasing the improper message. That's in 1984, every picture is repainted, every street's renamed. Well, we're seeing that right now. James Bond can't be a white guy anymore. It's not like you can have James Bond, a British Secret Service guy, and he's just the next iteration. Is that you have to erase that and install the next version, which cannot be a white dude. You can't just make a brand new secret agent guy who happens to be, pick your thing, whatever, run with it, make a cool story. So you see the erasure of the old, the imposition of the new, kind of in the culture realm. So what we're doing right now is a war in the cultural economy rather than the physical economy, because we're in kind of a social revolution, cultural revolution through information and media. Is that making sense? I don't know if I'm explaining this.
Well, yeah. No, this is all like really good stuff. I'm just very cognizant that I have my certain background and understanding, and I know a bit about it, but I'm not the deepest on, especially not, cultural history or political history or anything like that. And certainly I think some of my viewers definitely going to be thinking like, there's too many different strands of things going on at once. So let's maybe just take another run at it, just going from the start. And I think this will tie it together a bit. So what you were saying was you have, essentially, people have this idea of nature versus nurture. What makes us who we are? Some of it is inbuilt. You're born, your parents, where you were born. What inbuilt talent you might have for a musical instrument you pick up, or a proclivity, whatever it is. And then some of it is obviously nurture, right? You can be taught things, you can be exposed to cultural phenomena, and you learn and adapt and conform to certain norms, right? So if in the 18th century you had people who believed, that model is wrong, and instead there is no nature, everything, people just come into the world as like, blank slate, just a clean sheet of paper, and anything can be written and imprinted on there, then that's an opportunity for somebody who had that philosophy plus an authoritarian bent to try and create the world in a certain way. Now, then that then comes into the political theory, and you have like Karl Marx, and eventually sort of communism, which we saw mostly in the 20th century, with people taking over power and trying to impose those social structures against the more traditional liberal, in the old sense, Western democracy of free market capitalism and representative government, private property, property rights, exactly. And so then that battle has been obviously going on in its various iterations, such as with World War II and et cetera. And then now you've got to the modern era, where perhaps maybe because of nuclear weapons, or maybe because of the proliferation of the internet, you, instead of having the war be able to be fought in the way World War II or the Vietnam War was fought, or even the Cold War, like we're past that stage, and we're into the stage of informational warfare over people's minds through media and money, right?
So I mean, like we could talk for days about this stuff. So if I'm short circuiting something, by all means, like let me know. I'm trying to like not waste your.
I know we're trying. No, we're trying. This is good. I'm enjoying this.
So we're living through a time when the ideology behind this still assumes that you're a blank slate, and you see this probably in queer theory, which is not about gay people and saying it's okay to be gay. It's about creating queer people who reject normal, and it explicitly includes pedophilia. So I bring that up because like a natural human instinct is to understand that like kids aren't sexual. Like you're a dude. I don't know if you're straight or whatever. I mean, like you see a cute 25-year-old girl walk around, you're like, she's 25, she's cute. Like you don't feel the same way when you see a 10-year-old. It's like it's just not there, and that's natural human instinct. With like the queer theorists, I think of it as people who just their brains don't work. They have a mental health disorder. As it turns out, it tends to be a cluster B personality disorder, and they don't understand why the world won't allow them to have sex with kids. They don't understand why they have to get up out of bed every day and take a shower and go get a job. They just don't understand. They're oppressed by the very nature of the world, by reality itself. And so it's reality itself that has to be destroyed. So that kind of gets into the blank slate queer theory side of it, which kind of, it's a small piece of it, but you can kind of see the humans who they just don't know how to human, and the society itself that has to change. So it's an external locus of control.
Yes. So I like this framing of locus of control, because that's a very simple, I think, very effective way of seeing the world, which is to say that there's essentially two options. Whenever you encounter a problem in your life, as we all do, you have two options. You either have an internal locus of control. Well, I'm at least partially responsible for this. Like, let's say I don't know, I go outside and I like run into somebody. I can think, wait, I wasn't looking where I was going. So that's why I ran into this guy who was walking the other way. Or you can have an external locus of control. You can choose to recuse responsibility and say, who's this idiot? He walked into me. He wasn't looking. He was careless. I was blameless. I was just going about my day, but he didn't look and he ran into me, right? And you can manipulate, extend that across everything in life. Is it your responsibility, or are you just going to push it onto someone else? Now, it gets a bit fuzzy at the areas once you get to sort of religion and destiny and fate and that kind of thing. At a certain point, people wonder how much is really in their control and how much is not. But certainly you have control over your own attitude, at the very least, I think we would all say. And so I guess you're making the argument that the people with this blank slate theory, rather ironically, despite believing that everything can be imprinted in any way, also would tend to believe that it's not their fault if they can't fit into society.
What they've kind of done is just taken like the old school concept of God, the thing which has complete dominion over your whole life. Like, I'm not Christian, I'm one of the nuns. But if you think, Yahweh is out there, Yahweh is infinitely powerful. Yahweh can do to Germany whatever Yahweh wants to do, and there's nothing Germany's going to do about it. What you get nowadays is the same mindset has kind of morphed from that religious perspective through Hegel and Marx and then through the critical theorists and stuff, is that now it's the structure of society. So, for example, here in the United States, we have structural racism. The whole structure of society is racism. The whole system is racist, and that's why there's per capita more black people in jail. It's not that somebody committed crime and somebody got arrested and they're guilty or they're not. It's that the whole system and structure of society, the thing which has dominion over you, was built by white people, capital W white, which means Europeans and Asians, to oppress people of color. That means African and Hispanic people. And it's just a way of creating an external locus of control, zero internal responsibility. The whole problem is outside of me. It's societal structures itself. It's the United States itself. It's the Constitution itself. It's our national borders itself. The whole concept of civil rights and private property, which are rejected by the critical theorists and the critical race theorists. The whole idea of a church, the whole idea of a family unit. All those things are rejected and are considered part of this oppressive system. And if you actually look at it, and you trace this back to guys like Gramsci and Marcuse, all they're doing is saying, what is it that makes Western civilization work, or the United States work? If you target the United States, that would be the family unit, a constitution, national borders, try to, work hard, try to have a fair police system, all that. And so call those things the worst thing you can think to call them. And in America, that's racist. So it's a culture war against the things that makes the United States successful. That's what they're trying to tear down.
Yes, okay. And
that
I was just, well, from my point of view, I think it's often a bit of A and a bit of B. Like, it can often, these things are a cycle often. So it can be the case, and I would be very sympathetic to any argument that there is actually some institutionalized racism in America. I think that's probably very likely. And there's a key element to it that's also in part perpetuated by the fact that people believe there is a bias against them, so they act in a way expecting that, and and then that makes the problem worse, because then you have other people saying like, oh, well, if we're seeing these lopsided outcomes, but the people involved are refusing to accept any accountability, and then that creates a further like bias, and you can kind of go around in circles like that. So it is a bit of A and a bit of B, and the question is, how do you get out of that cycle? Well, it's hard to do on either side, right? And
that's a good point. So what you have is called strategic equivocation, or the Mott and Bailey. It's just a strategy to destroy the West. The truth of the matter is that in the United States, we have tons of problems. We have race problems, we have sex problems, gender problems, poverty problems. I mean, every country on planet Earth has problems. The West is probably, or at least until recently, was doing the best at trying to solve those problems. The issue is that these operate like a Trojan horse. Somebody can look at, say, George Floyd, and therefore, the George Floyd story. The guy who died in Minneapolis. Okay.
Yeah, roughly speaking,
Right.
that would
So we
spark
can
all
talk
the
about
Black Lives Matter and stuff. He got killed by the police, right? Yeah.
So you can talk about this George Floyd incident or something. And with 330 million people, I think our police make 10 million arrests a year, something like that. Like, you're going to have screwed up situations. But it's not about going through, in this case, police, and going over each and every police department and saying which ones work, which ones aren't working, what needs to be fixed, because it's not about fixing. It's not about building up. It's about tearing down. So therefore, it's not, you can't say like the Los Angeles or Miami police departments, maybe they're doing great, right? Hey, don't defund them. They're doing great. Go to Minneapolis Police Department and like fix the problems. It's not about that. It's about defund the police because you want to get rid of the police.
Can I hop in?
Does that make sense?
Just a second.
Yeah, go on.
I'm curious. So I'm operating under a couple assumptions. One, that the system is really a like chain of many different systems that kind of have different states and can interact with each other in a way that, like, the main goal of the overall structure is to keep itself alive. So I think the conflict and chaos that people experience is actually a good thing, because it's a sign that the system is, while there is this top-down kind of direction, it can't update all at once. So the people that are involved in it kind of, like, especially as just we age, we get comfortable, we have our own belief systems that I think solidify more and more. And so the conflict, especially like generational conflicts, I think is just a symptom of the fact that, the system can't update all at once. And that's a good thing. That chaos means that people, like individuals, do have a little more control than I think we want to tell ourselves. Does that make sense?
A little bit. I mean, if you get down into I'm talking about like the critical theory cultish part of it. It is about establishing an external locus of control. That external locus of control just replaced God. And the trick is people who want to destroy the West or the United States are going to make the external locus of control 100% corrupt. It's going to be the structure of the United States itself or the UK or any Western nation, and just try to create an army of people to tear that down. Very similar to Mao in China and, well, prior to 66, whenever he came into power. Similar concept, though.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know if this actually clarifies any, but the thing that I'm trying to say is the overall system has already pivoted. So it's not necessarily that there's this old system to actually defend. There are individuals that need to kind of uphold their own beliefs if they want to carry out their lives in whatever way that they have kind of developed for themselves, like their own perspective of the world. And I think that's really the best we can do, because the incentive structure of the system itself is to always keep it alive, right? That's the kind of the neat trick, right?
Well, I think there's like two definitions of systems here. So you get like the critical theory definition, which is not actually a thing. You could just call it the culture. There's no person behind it. There's no agency behind it. It's just a way of saying that the current society I live in is utterly corrupt, but it's this nebulous, amorphous concept. You can't actually put your finger on an issue. In practical terms, yeah, there are people in positions of power who are corrupt, who need to be, kicked out. And then there's normies on the street who just want to live their life and have an internal locus of control and do the best they can. So, my goal would be to get people to see past the fluffy language. Marxism is a lot of fluffy language about this amorphous, corrupted system, the they, them, the structures of society. I mean, this is easy for anyone to do, right? And actually start focusing on real people and real problems and real solutions, like Jeremy and I were talking about before. It's similar with like the environment. I mean, there's plenty of issues actually go on with the environment that actually need to be addressed. What you're finding is that those issues are being grifted off of for actual people to take actual power. And kind of the thing is to get individual citizens focused on the wrong target. Instead of focusing on the corrupt people, focus on the systemic systems of institutional structures and defund the police, rather than go, no, that's a dumb idea. We actually have a few bad cops here and a couple bad teachers and a couple bad politicians. Get them out and put good people in those positions.
Right. Okay. All right. This is making a lot of sense to me, because essentially, yeah, this is a strong position that the world is and always will have problems, and we should attack those problems as a logical case by case individual basis. Right. And your contention is that a lot of people in the world have been blinded by this sort of cultural, propaganda or sense or media or however you want to put it, to make them feel like there's some amorphous oppression that they're under, which distracts them and makes it also that they sort of advocate for causes, or they push in a direction that they might not realize is harmful, as opposed to just being able to see through the fog of all that bullshit and just on a case by case basis address some problems. Okay, good. I love that. That's an excellent point, and we do have to check in on the Bitcoin price, because we do that on every episode. But I think
you're the one looking at the clock, so you run with it.
Yes. No. This is great. We always have the guests give a bit of an introduction, a bit of a background. This has been quite different to what we usually have, but I think it's been really good, and I think it sets the stage for what we're about to talk about. Okay, so price of Bitcoin today, USD $237.06, which is stable. 1 BCH, 1 BTC buys 155.9 BCH, and 1 Ethereum buys 8.6 BCH. So we're down slightly on the BTC and ETH ratio. Just because I ask every guest, do you have any interest in trading cryptocurrencies or the volatility of the markets in that regard?
No, not my.
Okay, cool. Done. Moving on. Next topic. Right. So you have seen all these different problems. This you've identified these things in the world, and you obviously, with an internal locus of control, decided that you would take action. So you've started this site, resistcbdc.com, which is an informational website which has flyers that people can print off and hand out to people. Right. And it also has information about advocating for a digital bill of rights, I guess, in America, but anybody could apply the same thing in their own country, and trying to create some awareness, I guess, and movement towards rights being enshrined in law, such as there not being a penalty for not using a CBDC, for the right to privacy. And interestingly, you also had one about AI, that people should always have the option to use AI if they want to, but the option to avoid it if they didn't want to too. So it seems to me like you're concerned about some kind of system where, we all had to use AI to interact with a government service or something like that as well too. So on a practical level, what is this Resist CBDC site about?
Well, if you take a look at I'll just, as a general term, like the Great Reset, you guys know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Coming from the the World Economic Forum. The overall movement is to a digitization of the entire world, or at least the entire Western world for now. That means total surveillance, tracking, control, and ultimately manipulation. When you get to the point where every movie can be something like AI generated, like we all get our own movie, we all get our own books, we all get our own podcasts, which means we can all be manipulated with the thing that motivates us the most. What you're seeing right now as well is a huge push for data collection. I see this in kids' school. A lot of the social and emotional learning surveys are just the gigantic data mining surveys to get a digital ID on each and every person, track their academic progress, track their emotional state through 13 years of K-12 education, and then use that as a manipulation to see who gets into college, who gets a job. So if you look at this, if you had enough computing power, whatever the supercomputer that is, and you had a built-out digital ID, digital psychological model of every individual person, you can now manipulate that person infinitely. So if you look at it right now, it's really easy. Like you're searching something on your phone, and you go home and you log in your computer and you get those free ads. It was the thing you were searching on your phone, and somehow Amazon, Google, and YouTube, they're all talking to each other. I don't know how they know, but they know. Well, imagine that on steroids. So that's the direction all this is going. And that's the reason why you see protests in the street and Black Lives Matter burning stuff down. It's not about helping Black people, obviously. You can go look at how this turned out. The 2S LGBTQ movement is not about helping gay people. It's just about breaking down society such that this digital social credit system can be installed. Create the chaos, provide the solution to the chaos. You can see this in mass immigration. That's a push for digital ID. Green energy is a push for shortages and rationing for something like universal basic income and central bank digital currencies. So once you kind of start getting a picture of like what the overall worldview is, the Dutch farmer protest, that's food shortages, that's rationing. That's what, it's not actually about the environment. The Dutch farmers are some of the cleanest farmers on the planet. You go, okay, I know where this goes. A gigantic digitally managed society. How do I get people thinking about digital management? How do I get people thinking about a social credit system? Because if they can wrap their heads around that, then in the next coming years, I don't know what problems we're facing, but I know what the solution to every one of those problems is going to be. It's going to be some way to break down your civil rights, break down your national borders, break down your ability to think for yourself and do for yourself such that you are managed. And, you know, we're basically moving into a point where the communist commissars aren't people with guns and uniforms. It's your phone. It's your internet connection. So you see a big push on this one, for example, is a push for making computer chips throughout the world. I was even seeing something where they were trying to make them in Ethiopia of all places, not just Taiwan. I think Taiwan makes like 80-90% of the computer chips, right? Because the idea is your coffee pot and your washing machine and your car and everything gets chipped, everything gets interconnected, everything can get turned off if you are saying the wrong things on social media, right? So if you can get people thinking about this without having an hours-long conversation about critical theory and postmodernism and whatnot, because, you know, if you start talking about 2S LGBTQIA, like me, I don't care if you're gay, I could give a crap. But you're going to piss people off and they're going to shut down, and then they're still not going to be thinking about a social credit system. So my whole thing was, how do you get people thinking about a social credit system now? They can pick up on it in a minute. No one likes it. No one wants this. No one's going to be fighting over blacks and whites and who gets a social credit system, who's in, you know, UK versus Germany, and, you know, nobody wants this stuff. So how do you get people thinking about that total digital surveillance in a way that it sticks with them and then they know what to look for going forward? That's the direction I was going.
Yes. Okay. So this, and I agree with you that definitely the world is trending into this big data collection kind of system, and also an Internet of Things
right
sort of vibe where more and more things are going to be internet connected. Now, there's certainly an element to which I would say that is kind of inevitable, because we're not really going to see, okay, I'm going to go into my farming community and we're all going to go off the grid and live like the Amish, right? That's not going to work, at least only for a few people, and the rest of humanity is going to power off on its interconnected, globally connected, internet reliant society. So I guess my question is, so you see that there's potentially these huge problems like we already have in China in terms of, I wouldn't want to live in that society, and I'm sure most people wouldn't want to either if they could appreciate the scale of what's going on there. So it's more about creating the awareness to ensure we don't tip away sort of their civil liberties and there is a resistance, rather than trying to say we need to stop this or turn it off in some way. Is that right?
Well, yeah. I mean, a lot of the technological progress is going to happen regardless. There's going to be neural implants, for example. And, you know, if your grandma has Alzheimer's disease or you had a spinal cord injury, like, we want those neural implants. There's a good piece to that. The issue is that I compare it to, like, say, 1776, when we had our War of Independence. Like, people could look around and see British soldiers with guns stopping you from saying what you wanted to say, going where you wanted to go, doing what you wanted to do. And that was a physical world. And people could see what was going on. And they wanted a constitution with a Bill of Rights that gave him protections against that. Well, what we're dealing with now is everything becomes digitized. We have the same problem. Who's going to be imposing their will upon us, but in a digital realm? So the biggest problem I found is that most people don't recognize the threat. They don't see what's happening. Now, a lot of people are suspicious. A lot of people know something's up. They can see China. They can see the cashless economy. You pay with your palm at the grocery store. That's real convenient. Over here, we've got cameras all over the buildings and whatnot. People can sense there's something up, but they don't really know how to wrap their heads around, like, the scope and the scale where this is going. If you pay attention to Klaus Schwab, he plans on consolidating the West into the United Nations World Economic Forum, building up China, and then merging the two, and they ain't got their one world digitally controlled government. That might be 20 years, 50 years down the road. I don't know. But you can kind of see the direction this is going. And it just really means that there's some humans out there trying to impose their will upon other people. And a couple hundred years ago, that involved muskets. And there's people out there nowadays trying to impose their will, their Gnostic vision of what the world's supposed to look like upon everybody else. We're all serfs, we're all feudal subjects. They're trying to do it digitally. So it's just a matter of getting normal people on the street to go, I get it. I get that there's a thing going on. I get the digital control. How do we fight back? How do we push back? And then ultimately, I'm pushing for something like a Bill of Digital Rights, where it's like civil rights, but it's just for like the 21st century, because we're not doing, I call it, we're way past Internet 1.0 at this point. We're not logging on to AOL to send an email. We're way past that. And it's time we just need like a broad understanding throughout the public that there is a threat. The convenience is the lure. This is about tracking and control. There's a grift behind all these actual problems, the fake solutions behind real problems. And people need to start getting more involved, more aware that there's actually an issue.
Now, one thing I've got to ask you about is, I think when I looked at this and when you explained it to me there, I'm fascinated that your chosen route in some respect is awareness. I love that. And then a legal angle. So given all of what you said before, do you have strong faith that given something could get enshrined into law, that would kind of be enough? Like we've already seen, like there's the what's it called? Like the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and stuff like that are only sort of as good as the culture that backs it up.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So if you're worried that society is potentially being culturally co-opted, why do you think a legal enshrinement would really help to protect people's rights?
That's a perfect question. So the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the way they're written, they're better understood as a form of conflict resolution, where we all understand that I've got the right to go to church or not go to church, or walk down the street or not walk down the street, that my money, my house, my tools, my life are mine, yours are yours. And if you step into my space, I own firearms, I can kill you. If I step into your space, I would expect the same in return. When we both understand what's going on, we codify into law a form of conflict resolution. That's called like the Constitution. And we just say, you know what, we're going to live our own lives, and we're going to come together for the police, the city hall, whatever, to like patrol the streets, to make sure, don't have criminals on the street, and you fill the potholes in the street, right? Basic stuff like that. But you start with a fundamental understanding where all parties, or at least the majority of the people in society, recognize the threats, recognize the value of private property, recognize the value of free speech, and they all agree that that's, there are some sacred areas that you just don't impose your will upon someone else. So were we to have something like another constitutional amendment here in the United States that talks about a Bill of Digital Rights, that comes after you have widespread understanding that there actually is a problem. Because again, if no one reads the Constitution, no one knows what's in there, it doesn't mean anything. What you have to do is have a whole bunch of very capable, ordinary people who are physically healthy, mentally healthy, financially healthy. They've got their house, their money, they've got their privacy, they've got the right to bear arms, whatever that is, and they all agree to just live free and leave each other alone. And that agreement is the written law of the Constitution. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. Okay. So you're saying that the law, you're pushing for a law, but really that in the end, that would be like the capstone to a successful cultural mission, rather than being the actual point in it, or the defense in and of itself. And that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I can.
First and foremost, you got to live with a whole bunch of people who recognize the value of private property and freedom of speech and the digital.
Yes. No, and that's very similar. We'll get onto this, but that's very similar to Bitcoin. Jet, what are you going to say? Yeah.
There's one thing that, or like, I also can appreciate what you're trying to accomplish here, but I would also suggest that there's an importance to not just highlighting a resistance, but an alternative, because it's not like this is asking for permission, right? It's this like, can we please make sure that these things don't get corrupted? But with the same things, with the same tools that you're using, with the same tools that they're using to manipulate narratives and kind of push people to behave and think in certain directions, there are ways that we can avoid all of that. Like, we don't need to participate in their systems now. We just need more people to participate in these alternative systems. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's a good point. So what I do is I try to talk to people about it briefly. One of the things I do here real quick is a thing you can download on the website. I print these up. I like yellow. It's my favorite color. Throw it in my wallet and spin cash. And so when I'm buying a coffee or lunch or whatever, right, I just throw 20 on the counter, talk to the person for like 30 seconds about digital surveillance and CBDCs. And they're like, oh, okay, I didn't know. Leave them a little piece of paper they can read. Sometimes people blow me off. I've had, 1 minute conversations where people go, yeah, that's a social credit system. And I go, yeah, that's exactly what it is. So you kind of get a little bit of anxiety in people, maybe a little bit of concern. And then you give them a solution, like you're saying, a bill of rights, a bill of digital rights, and alternate systems, whether that be currency or media or whatever. So you kind of get like, yeah, there's a negative here, but there's also a positive in the other direction that we can start moving towards, rather than just showing up and saying problem, freak out, and don't provide any solutions.
Yes. Okay. All right. Yeah. No. This all makes sense, and we'll come back around to the solutions and stuff. But so let's just talk a little bit more. We've already touched a little bit about it, but the digital ID, right? So the game plan in quotation marks, the way it's going is that people are increasingly going to be tracked and have sort of an aggregate digital footprint, right? I think that's pretty undeniable, because you can even see in the last 10 years of the internet how things have gone from, you just have a different account to a few different sites. Many sites didn't even require accounts, and so on and so forth, to now more and more like the large social media sites are the major players in the online discussion. Other websites, you can often log in with those same credentials, right? So it's already linked and even easier than before to track.
Google ID works across the board.
That's right, exactly. Sign in with Google ID, one password, one-stop shop for everything, which is very convenient. But as is always the case, convenience is the trade-off of, security and lack of control, right? So that's clearly the direction things are going in. And maybe I want to get your comment on, a lot of people said, like, well, with the whole pandemic, that was going to be a key crisis point in which people are already in fear and they're already disrupted and so on, that was where there was going to be some introduction of digital ID systems. Now, whether we did or didn't see that is probably, I guess, debatable, because in some countries there was. Yeah, that's right. In some countries there was, and in some countries there wasn't. And in some it kind of got part of the way, like in Australia, they were doing QR code scan-ins just to go into like restaurants and stuff like that. And then that kind of got repealed, but it was pretty close to just becoming, that's just the way things are done here now, right? So what's your angle on that part of it?
Well, let's see if I can answer your question here. It was being attempted in various manners to try to turn your QR code, a green pass, on your cell phone or your vaccine papers into travel papers, and that was pretty clear. And if you didn't have any concept of what the Great Reset was beforehand, you might have thought it made sense. Once you kind of start realizing where things are going, you can look back afterwards, or people who knew about this more beforehand could say, "Wait a minute, you're just trying to digitally track me everywhere I go, make sure someone has to have travel papers, a digital ID, QR code on your phone, whatever that is." And honestly, I don't know what the solution is going forward. I'm glad that it seems like a lot of people from the COVID stuff, a lot of people figured out that there was something weird going on. I don't know if they track that to, the world well beyond COVID, or if they're still just thinking that was COVID, that was crazy, now we've moved on. I don't know.
Yeah, okay. So I've got a slide here called European EID, where we have been talking about this on this show, maybe not since inception, but certainly certainly over the last 12 to 18 months, we've been bringing it up. It's been a bit of a theme. And the same with the CBDC type of stuff, and telling people that it's going to be coming, and et cetera. And now it's getting to the stage where it's not just theory anymore. It is happening in real time. Yes.
Yeah,
so
Europe's farther down this road than the United States.
So I've got an article here which says, I'm going to just read a quote from it. It says, with a view to ensuring a trusted and secure digital identity for all Europeans, the Council Presidency and European Parliament representatives reached today a provisional agreement on a new framework for a European digital identity. And then you've got a quote here: with the approval of the European Digital Identity Regulation, we are taking a fundamental step so that citizens can have a unique and secure European digital identity. This is a key advance for the European Union to be a global reference in the digital field, protecting our democratic rights and values, end quote. And that comes from Nadia Calvino, acting Spanish first vice president and minister for economy and digitalization. And then it goes on with the European Digital Identity Wallet, blah, 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 something to people and businesses to secure and trustworthy electronic identification and authentication. Under the new law, member states will offer citizens and businesses digital wallets that will be able to link their national digital identities with proof of other personal attributes, e.g. driving license, diplomas, bank account. Citizens will be able to prove their identity and share electronic documents from their digital wallets with a click of a button on their mobile phone. The new European digital identity wallets will enable all Europeans to access online services with their national digital identification, which will be recognized throughout Europe without having to use private identification methods or unnecessarily sharing personal data. User control ensures that only information that needs to be shared will be shared. And that's a segment from this press release that I've got linked on the slides here. People can check that out if they're interested. So walk me through what you make of that kind of a statement.
They're just trying to like sneak it in, make it sound like it's a good thing. Over here, there's a big push for interoperable. That means it can be used across platforms, digital ID through healthcare. So your healthcare records can be accessed via the government or any health professional. You guys are going to see it through travel, money. Eventually, the end goal is that that digital ID gets assigned a carbon allocation. And eventually you get assigned a CBDC, which is then programmable, how far you can travel, where you can spend your money. You can't spend your money outside of your allotted travel zone or your 15-minute city or whatever it is. So it's a way of, again, Trojan horsing. I think that's probably the best analogy. Bringing in the system of digital control under something that sounds innocuous or helpful or convenient or whatever it is, until you get to the point where merely to travel through the checkpoint or to spend your money, you have to have the digital ID because the cashless economy and the physical IDs or whatnot are gone. And then somebody can start clamping down.
Yeah, it certainly is a step in the boiling frog on the way from, why you already have your phone. Why don't we link, your healthcare? Why don't we link your bank? They literally highlighted these words in the article that I read. European digital identity, electronic identification, digital wallets, prove their identity, share electronic documents, access online services, and recognized throughout Europe. So even just between those words that were bolded in the article itself, you can see the framework for creating some type, like a passport system that we already have. And I'm not an expert on passports, but what I'm fairly sure is like you didn't used to need them to travel in the way they did. They were for during wartime only, and now they have just become a requirement, right? And
well, you can see like France is doing it. France has already been shutting down their short haul flights.
Right.
You have to take a train. That's because of the carbon footprint. They're not shutting down the flights of billionaires on private jets. That's just fine. Yes. Macron has said that loyalty to France, I forget how he worded it, but loyalty to France is unpatriotic. Loyalty to the EU is patriotic. What they're actually doing is just erasing nation states to create their one world digitally managed society. I mean, we know what this is. We also know it doesn't work because the way to resist the tyranny of one very powerful person is you get thousands and thousands of normal people all networking, working together. Now, if all those people speak French, we call that France. And it works. You got,
Yes.
I don't know how many, 50 million people or something are in France. When they all decide to work together, that's pretty damn powerful. When you get 80 million Germans and they all decide to work together, that's pretty powerful. If you just have atomized individuals with their digital ID and their bug allocation, their CBDC allocation, living in their pods, there's no way to resist somebody imposing their will. So you have no power, you have no control. And that's where you get into the cluster B personality disorders, the people with the God complex. If you're nothing, if you're at zero, then they can rule over you like a god, and they get off on being in charge of everything. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So you have people in society who are biased towards a sort of authoritarian tendency. They're the ones who get into the UN, who get into government, whatever, because it's natural. If you were attracted to power and ruling over people, of course, that's what you get into. And they're now creating this system of a linked together digital identity where at the click of a button, they can just shut down any individual that they like, who is obviously will, in the extreme case, be the ones protesting and trying to prevent that being the system that we all operate under. Of course, then it's who's the one who gets to push the button, who gets to decide who to switch on and off,
actually it's going to be who gets to program the AI, and the AI can scan every email, every text, every phone call, eventually, voice transmission, voice recognition, and be able to say, Jeremy, he's spreading dangerous misinformation. He said the COVID virus might have come from Wuhan.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to travel. Your money's frozen. Whatever. I mean, we see that with Chrystia Freeland up in Canada. The truckers, zero due process, zero court hearings, zero charges filed. Their money was frozen.
Yes, and we did cover that extensively on this show. So this is where I get to. Okay, we've talked about all the background. We've talked about this digital identity is coming into it. So here it really gets to the pointy end of, like we were mentioning before, people are busy, right? People are not going to take hours and hours out of their time to listen to you, to listen to me, to think through all these larger societal issues. They're trying to feed their family and get dinner and watch a movie once in a while to blow off some steam and go to the football on Saturday night. So
we're not trust fund babies trying to control everybody else. We actually have jobs and lives and stuff.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Both the advocates and the people we're trying to reach are busy, and they've got a lot going on. So it's hard to make time for this, even if in the grand scheme of things, this is critically important. So you said people have been waking up a bit from the coronavirus stuff. Do you see any other patterns? For instance, one of the things that cryptocurrency advocates are very familiar with is people don't really care about the banking system until it bites them, until their account gets suddenly shut, somebody else's account got shut down, whatever. But my account got shut down. Now I fucking care. Or what about if, they're instituting some changes of policy, blah, 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 blah. And then it's well, I can't withdraw over this certain $2,000 why not? Where it's my money, can I just take it out?
It's been going down that rabbit hole.
Yes, very, very, very fast. So it's I imagine those are the kind of things that get on your radar too. But is there any other trends or things you think we can point to or highlight that help people to understand how pernicious this is faster?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, what I've run into is there's a lot of people who are suspicious about a handful of different issues. They kind of look at the green energy and the battery powered trucks and they're like, that's not going to work. How do you turn all your cars into electric and then turn off the nuclear power plants, Germany? Something's not adding up, right? Or it could be the race issues or something. Because over here, Black Lives Matter, I mean, it's just notorious the amount of money that they've been embezzling. And people look at that and they're like, I don't have a beef with black people. Something's not fair. Let me know. And then they look at this. A lot of the, I've been watching the UK. You can put up the Pride Progress flags everywhere, but you can't put up the UK flag or the English flag or something. People can look at that and be like, that's kind of weird, So I've seen a lot of people pick up on these little different pieces, but I haven't seen as many people tie it all together. That's kind of the bigger problem, is that when you actually look at it, there's a strategy coming from the UN World Economic Forum called Everything Everywhere All at Once. Kind of self-explanatory. They attack everything everywhere all at once. So yeah, a lot of people have seen like little sections of it. I was at a meeting the other night with a bunch of farmers who were talking about, diesel fuel, fertilizer, that sort of thing. And, it was sad because they're usually the people I found that are pretty based are like blue collar, brown collar, working class people. Like the laptop class, I think they just live in their heads and online, and there's a lot they don't get. But like people who get dirty for a living, like they kind of get when something's off. They're like, this ain't right. And even a lot of them were like, well, we're trying to save the environment. And I'm like, you guys know, like the vast majority of the pollution in the oceans and the air comes from China and India. And they're not subject to these rules. Like, you guys get that, right? And they were still trying to like, even them who could kind of see that there's a little bit of, something messing up here, that they still hadn't quite wrapped their heads around it. So, I don't know how we type all these issues together, other than I just try to talk about digital surveillance and see if that's kind of like a door opening, and then somebody can go, is this related to green energy? And I can say, actually, yes, it is.
Yeah, so walk me through that, because this is something that the Bitcoin Cash community is very familiar with. And I mean, there's a whole panoply of cryptocurrencies, and I know you're a little bit familiar with that, but I don't know to what extent. But what I can tell you, just to summarize, is that in the original Bitcoin, before it split into multiple versions and before there was 10,000 alternatives, it was a peer-to-peer grassroots movement. You would go around and you would talk to individual people, like your friends or even just people at shops and whatever, and say, have you heard about Bitcoin? No, you haven't. Like, let me explain it to you, and let me download it and send you some, and show, etc. Now, after the split and after everything that went on, Bitcoin Cash still to this day is one of the probably the top, definitely in the top 3, and most of the rest don't care at all about that kind of grassroots missionary type behavior to meet people in real life, to transact with them in an alternative economy, and to give them a practical example of it. Because you could talk someone's ear off forever, and that's then you try and refer them to the podcast or whatever.
Like, what do I do with
inflation? Exactly. But they need to see it work in front of them right there, right? So we have a lot of people that are familiar with these kind of face-to-face situations. So it seems to me like you're trying to do the same thing. And when you showed us before that piece of paper, that's a perfect example. Can you talk me through from the very start in a bit more like specific detail, so we can learn and copy any of these ideas when you're encountering somebody? Let's say you go into a petrol store, a grocery, what's it called? Diesel, you're filling up your car, and you go into the cash register. How do you approach that situation, and how do you get your message across to them quickly and easily?
I just pull cash out of my wallet. Here in America, it's a $20 bill. I'm not sure what you guys do over there. And I have a handful of these in my wallet. This is the prints forward to a page. It's on my website. You can download it. I just pay cash and ask them if they've ever heard of CBDC, ask them if they've ever heard of a carbon wallet, and kind of mention, this is the way the UN wants to handle climate change. Sign all your purchases with carbon score, right? Credit card companies are already working on that right now. I've got a link to that on my website. And just, you kind of feel it out because you don't know who you're talking to. Some people, they know exactly what you're talking about, and some people are totally clueless. So it's a conversation, 30 seconds or a minute. And then I found if you leave someone like a little, slip of paper, something they can read, it registers more. They can look at it a couple times. They can check out the website. More than just having a conversation, and walking out the door and they never hear from you again. And 3 minutes later, the whole conversation's gone. So what I do is, I do 2 things. One, when I'm spending cash, when I'm out just like doing my thing and you're, grabbing lunch or whatever, spend cash, hand someone a little flyer. And then that's probably something that people who are following you could do as well, that I would recommend. If you kind of see where things are going and you see that there's just more and more chaos coming, because we don't know what it's going to be, but so far the people behind this aren't in jail, right? So we know the chaos is going to keep coming, and we know in some manner that's going to be a move towards total digital surveillance. So people who follow your podcast now, they could make their own little flyer. They could use mine, whatever.
Can you read it? Can you read out what does it say on this flyer? Just read it out for me.
Oh, it has like a little $1 logo right here, and the front of it talks about a central bank digital currency.
Can you read it specifically? Like I'm
sure, yeah.
As you're onboarding, 2,000 people here live rather than one by one.
I'm paying in cash to support local businesses and resist the move to a cashless economy. In a cashless economy, all transactions are performed with central bank digital currencies. And then I give an example of what central bank digital currencies means. So it allows politicians and bankers digital tracking and control of all your spending. It works like a coupon or a voucher. It's not your money. It can only be spent on approved items. It can be assigned a location in which you may spend, thus limiting your ability to travel. It can be assigned a carbon score to limit your ability to purchase items like gas and meat. It limits your ability to save cash for emergencies or to escape domestic violence. I figured when you're talking with women, talking about escaping domestic violence, it registers, right? And it may be confiscated or frozen without due process of law. And every transaction is recorded forever. There's no anonymity, no garage sales or swap. It kind of gets people who are used to dealing in cash. And that's the front. And then in the back, I talk about digital ID. And that says it's concurrent with the CBDC. You establish a globally coordinated, unique identification for all people, such as a QR code on your phone, fingerprint, retinal scan, face scan, palm print also. The G20 members, those are the big Western nations, and the UN continue to push for digital travel passports. Bill Gates is doing that through Gavi as well. He's been doing that for years. The EU's been doing that for years. And then it says vaccine mandates were used to introduce digital passports. The European Union and Gavi have promoted this even before COVID. They were doing the same thing. COVID was just an excuse to keep pushing it. And so the World Health Organization Pandemic Treaty proposed global digital surveillance under the guise of stopping future pandemics. And this too was also promoted before COVID. They're doing the same thing now. It's just another reason to do the thing they were doing anyway. And then the last line is facial recognition cameras are being installed throughout the West. So it kind of gives people an idea of what is a digital ID, what is a digital currency, how do these merge, how's that a problem? And it's something somebody can read in like, a minute or whatever there. And I only hand these out when I'm at like a retail establishment. Like I don't go knocking on somebody's door to their house, right? So wherever you're used to seeing customers, you're just paying cash, hand them a little flyer, they can read it on their own and kind of go, I kind of heard about some of that stuff.
So at gas stations, do you do it also like in restaurants or at public meetups or what?
So that's what I do when it's just me out. I mean, you're not going to spend $1,000 on whatever in cash, but a lot of times you're grabbing lunch, you're grabbing a beer, I grab sunflower seeds when you're at the gas station, whatever. Anytime you can spend cash and anytime you can hand a flyer. If you're into garage sales, if you're into farmers markets are really good, by the way, to kind of get that connection with your local farming community who tend to be grassroots, salt of the earth kind of people, and they tend to like working in cash. And to talk to them about, I'm going to deviate a little bit here. So that's basically where I use it. Anytime you're spending $20, $50, something like that. One of the best places I was going to suggest for your listeners is to, in their local community with their neighbors, their pubs and farmers markets, anywhere you can, knowing what's coming our way, make friends with your farmers and get them signed up on Bitcoin or taking cash, or at least looking out for diesel fuel and fertilizer shortages if they're not already seeing it. And one of the great benefits that I found from this is, like, I run into some, like, I'm not young, right? But I talk to a 20-year-old who is, say, into Bitcoin and CBDCs. All of a sudden, we're friends. I can also talk to some
yes.
I can talk to some 70, 80-year-old person who's a Christian and being like, this Marxist stuff, this is a satanic religion, right? I mean, it's Luciferian. You guys get that? And like, all of a sudden, we're friends because I'm speaking their language. And so you really get this huge network. And that's what I'm hoping we can do, is get just like a whole bunch of normies out on the street, like just talking to each other, hanging out, being like, yeah, you know what? We go to a different church. We don't go to church. We're not the same color. Like, I don't care. Like, whatever. We're on the same team here. We're on team normal people who don't like all this fuckery that's going on. So any one of your followers, if they want to make their own little flyer or use mine, whatever, I talk to 2-3 people a week using these, just doing your thing. If you had in any community 1% of the population, 1 in 100 people, 2 or 3 times a week, you're talking to people. At the end of a year, I mean, think of how many people you can run into at that point and how many people you can get signed up on Bitcoin or thinking about digital surveillance, whatever. Yes. And at the end of the year, every one of those people, they're going to be like, oh, I remember that Jeremy guy. He's the one who knew that these problems were coming. He's the guy who helped me out. He mentioned this to me 6 months ago. He mentioned this to me 4 months ago. He mentioned this to me 2 months ago. And then last month, he signed me up on Bitcoin. Jeremy's a good dude,
Yes. No, you're clearly a seasoned onboard, because that's exactly how it goes, right? The BCH community, very, very familiar with that. Like, everybody's always, handing out just $1 or 50 cents and explaining about fiat currency and inflation and et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, what happens, you mention it, And then like there's a couple of restaurants around here that I try to seed the idea in their mind. You tell it as a joke a couple of times. Hey, do you take Bitcoin? And they laugh and and then you tell it a couple more times. They go, you asked about that a couple of times. Oh, maybe we'll think about it. I'll look into it. But it's a big thing. They're not going to do it for one customer, but it gets on their mind, and then they see it in the news, and then they see it, and then next time, eventually they come to you and they say, where do I find out more? Right.
Right. So it's usually not the first time. But if you talk to someone over the course of 6 months and you keep going back there to the pub or the farmer's market or whatever, and you're like, Bitcoin, you guys want to talk about this? Spending cash, eventually they get to know you. Eventually they get to trust you. Maybe they do a little research on their own. And then sometimes you go up there and you're like, hey, Bitcoin. And they're like, yeah, sign me up. And you got a friend. And you got one more person. Kind of what I'm hoping is that if you listen to like Schwab and company and whatnot, they've sounded a bit more anxious recently because they can tell enough people are waking up. And the issue is when you wake up and start wrapping your head around it and you get past the whole, can't be true because it's crazy. And you go, no, true things are true, regardless of whether or not they're crazy. Like you don't go back to sleep. And so my hope is if you get enough, parents who are homeschooling, people running for school boards, that's the thing around here, enough people on Bitcoin, enough people opting out of, fiat currency, enough people going down and talking to the local city council, enough people electing like a local sheriff who actually knows what's going on and understands the Constitution. Eventually you're going to get to the point where you got guys like Rishi Sunak, who was hard into central bank digital currencies. And lately he's had to back off the whole EV mandate. Like Ford Motor Company got pissed off at him because they've lost like $4.5 billion trying to push everything into EV. And he's like, well, maybe we got to back off a little bit. So, you get enough people involved in this, you can start applying the pressure where it needs to apply, and you can start like peeling off people who are part of this, or at least making them go down a little bit. Like even every little incremental win is still part of a win. Like we're going to turn the corner, but it's going to take like death by a million cuts. We got to have 1 million people out there just poking like every day, just a little bit. And to poke every day just a little bit, honestly, like it can't take huge time or huge money because none of us have that. And that's why it's 30 seconds while I'm checking out. I can print up enough of these for a year for like 10, 15 bucks, super easy. And every time you come into contact with someone, they know that Jeremy's a good guy.
Now, I have a quote here on the slides, which I'm 95% sure I got off your Twitter feed, which is that most of our neighbors are clueless, not subversive. And when I read that, I thought that does kind of summarize it there. Have you had any instances of people pushing back or getting angry at you or attack you or anything like that in this sort of awareness raising you've been on?
I've been blown off by a few people. I've had a few people who wrap their heads around it, right away. So far, no one's got like pissed off at me because it's so much harder to get pissed off at someone when you're looking them in the eye and you're being genuine and sincere about something that affects them. You got to be kind of mentally ill to yell at that person. So I haven't had that issue. I would say that brings up an awesome point, though, that I look at this as targeting basically like 3 people or 3 groups of people, right? Most of them are just your normies who've never heard of this, which is perfect. Maybe you can get them signed up to Bitcoin. Maybe you get them thinking about digital surveillance. The second thing you can try to do is to get the people like us who kind of know what's going on. How do we get out there on a regular basis and spread the word? Because whatever's going on with Twitter or the BBC or the Canadian Broadcasting Company or like whatever it is, it's not sufficient because most people still don't know what we're talking about. So how do you have like an uncancelable grassroots movement? It's just us talking, and we get out there and we get the next person to start doing a thing every day, just a little bit, but every day. And then the third group, which is kind of important, is like the wackadoodles, the reactionaries, the people who might turn violent if something crazy happens, and to reach them and be able to go, take it easy. There's people involved in this who know what's going on, and we're pushing back. The last thing we want to do is freak out and put something on the TV screens for everyone to look at and go, oh my God, all those radicals, look what they're doing. We need to crack down on the media. We need to crack down on digital currencies. We need to crack down on the internet. Just to get them to kind of like, because I've ran into a couple of them, just like, tone it down and be like, look, we're not surrounded by crazy people. We're surrounded by clueless people. And just one at a time, we wake them up.
Yes, making a lot of sense. Okay, so when it comes to CBDCs, we are now starting to see, and I've got a quote here from the Boston Fed from their Project Hamilton, which I've mentioned before on the show, and I do probably myself need to do a bigger deep dive into it, but I have a quote here which says, "The second architecture demonstrated throughput of 1.7 million transactions per second, with 99% of transactions durably completing in under a second, and the majority of transactions completing in under half a second. It also appears to scale linearly with the addition of more servers." So what that is to say is that there are already systems in place to roll out a currency, a CBDC, which would be controllable, which the government could delete the money of political activists or anybody they didn't like. And eventually through AI systems, anybody having wrong think will just get their currency.
And really that threat being there is enough to shut some people down.
Yes, well, most people, right? It's a social hysteria, a social bystander problem type of thing, right? If everybody's afraid, nobody makes a move, and then everybody stays afraid, right? So you already have that system in place, because critically from the Bitcoin Cash perspective, we're trying to make a free currency that can work at global scale, and that's not trivial unless you're doing it from a centralized server, in which case it's a lot easier, and these guys are already there. So we are trying to catch up on the tech front to be feasible at that scale without losing the open, permissionless nature of it.
And that's why you like Bitcoin Cash, is that right?
Yes. So obviously there's loads more, on my channel and stuff. You can look into all of it, but essentially the difference in the Civil War, which happened in 2017, and I'm sure this might actually a lot, will be that the same, the powers that be came in and they had to put a stop to this, right? And so what did they do? Same things they always do, right? Censorship, media manipulation, influencing a couple of the key people, which in this case happened to be the software developers, paid them off with big salaries and said, this Bitcoin thing, which you're using as a grassroots peer-to-peer currency, maybe just stop that. What if it was just an investment asset that a few people held in a bank account and will one day be traded against a CBDC that we'd have control over, right? And so
they wait for BlackRock to pull out their paper Bitcoin, so they got a derivative.
Exactly. That's right, and that's what we're seeing today. And the
Bitcoin,
the divergence between the BTC and BCH at the time that the community's fractured, you could arguably say that the ideological split happened earlier than the actual network split in two, right? There was a period of contention as both sides were vying for control of the brand and everything. Anyway, the BCH side, in my mind, and hopefully in your mind too, the good guys, we lost. And the BTC guys won with the orange, they got the orange branding, they got all the clout, and later on they got all the hype and media attention. But here they are today, shilling out for the Wall Street, come in, BlackRock, buy up our coins, whatever. And it's like you're saying, where people can kind of know something's wrong. And that's why Bitcoin has not gone viral in the public's awareness, is because you ask people about it and they're like, Bitcoin, I thought that was some counterculture type of, against the banks and everything. But then they run into these other Bitcoin people. They see these headlines where it's all about like Michael Saylor, we're buying up more shares of Bitcoin. He literally calls them the shareholders rather than like the Bitcoiners. So it's very hard to get a message through with that, bullshit, I guess, with that propaganda all being put over the top.
Well, over here, all of I call it corporate media, not so much Main Street media, because so much of it is just corporate filling. Even like the news. I mean, if you're not paying for it, you are the product being sold. So things like for us, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, all of them, they're just tanking. Like nobody likes them, and that's why we were talking about earlier. Like Joe Rogan's getting super popularity. He's outside of that. There's an amount of authenticity and truth in what he's doing. So that's why I kind of came at it from my direction, is that Joe Rogan's doing the Joe Rogan thing. We don't need another Joe Rogan. We don't need another Jordan Peterson or another Neil Oliver or James Melville, a couple guys over in your area. What we need are just people on the street who can get out there a little bit every week and do something. And that's what I'm hoping, like maybe some of your followers, if they're wondering what to do, one of the best things you can do to push back on all this great reset is to get people signed up on like a Bitcoin Cash, whatever that is. and to raise awareness about it. And that happens like we were talking about earlier, just one person at a time, one conversation at a time, just make it part of your life where it's not a huge amount of money or time, but you just keep making those relationships. And that is rebuilding the social fabric. We were talking about earlier, part of the whole critical theory is just the giant divide and conquer strategy. Just get everybody infighting, which is exactly what, any government's going to do to any other government they want to weaken. Just get all the citizens infighting. And one of the best ways to fix that is just to go look someone in the eyes and be like, hey, I ain't got a beef with you. Have you heard about this? Can I help you out? And all of a sudden you're starting to make friends, and like we were talking about as well, people who are have the internal locus of control and really strive to do good things and grow as an individual versus tearing other people down. There's a certain amount of respect you have for those people, regardless of what color they are or what age they are, or man or woman. You're like, oh, here's a pretty based person who's like doing good things in a realm totally different from mine, but they're a totally chill person. I can relate to those people.
Okay, we've got a slide here for question of the week, which is a new segment on the show. And we had Queen Ofiuka at G_RELYT at GRELIT write in and asked a couple of weeks ago, are you afraid of World War III being incited by the powers that be as the fiat cycle dies? So as the fiat currency printing and inflation and people wake up and this all comes to a bit of a head, do you think we're all going to get nuked? Is it all going to be game over? What's your take?
That's a good question. I think we're already in World War III. I think it's an information war, and it's already being waged upon us. And one of the biggest mistakes that we're going to make is to think that national borders are the key determining boundary.
The battle lines, yeah.
Rather than who's in the elite club and who's the norm. I think military conflicts are just going to be a distraction or part of a battle in the larger information war that we're actually fighting. I think if you frame this as just a global information war and the nation states and the guns are all just collateral, they're all an aside to what is fundamentally going on, I think that it may not be the correct perspective, but I think it really helps if you kind of like look at it through that lens.
But if the good guys win, are the bad guys just going to let off the nukes? Fuck it, let's all burn then. Well,
the problem is that we all got to live on this planet. So if somebody lets off the nukes, I mean, even if you have an underground bunker and you want to live there for 10 years, I mean, you're still living on a planet that's not nuked. So in some manner, somebody might someday. I mean, I don't put that as a zero chance. And if you look at this, we are actually dealing with like cultish people. Like if you look at the mass death under Mao, Stalin, Hitler, like people with that mindset are still around. And some of them work at the UN and the World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization. So it's not that it can't happen. I'm going to bet that the people behind this movement are going to be more strategic than that. And they're going to have conflicts like we see between like Israel and Gaza right now. Like there's a whole bunch of, without getting into the Israel, Gaza and the people, there's just a whole bunch of stuff in that area that just does not look right. Like, for example, why was the Israeli border that poorly guarded on the anniversary of the Yom Kippur War for that long? I mean, some of the stuff, I don't know the answer. It looks false flaggy. But some of the COVID stuff looks false flaggy. The 2S LGBTQ stuff looks false flaggy. The BLM stuff looks false flaggy. There's like so much of this where there's like a kernel of truth or there's something real that happened as the Trojan horse for a whole bunch of BS that's just meant to break down society. So I'm going to bet that nukes aren't going to be by any means the first choice, but that doesn't mean there isn't going to be some sort of mass death and chaos and destruction and, which is all the more reason why to go make friends with a farmer and a nurse and your neighbors.
Yes.
Go make some friends right now.
Yes, just in case. Jed, do you have an answer? Are we getting nuked? World War III? I guess the question is World War III, not specifically the nukes. So I like this angle that World War III is already an information war. It's not about the nukes. But this was kind of how I took it. Is the apocalypse incoming if we win?
So I think it really depends on, it will get worse before it gets better, right? If the fiat cycle dies, listen, it's going to be rough. But I'd like to see it through. Like, even if that means, listen, okay, to me this is, do we accept that people will die quicker to achieve a admirable goal, or continue keep on keeping on with something where, like, you know, there's the famous clip of Roger Ver crying because babies are getting murdered, right? Like, I'd much rather, and this isn't to say that without fiat, like, these things won't exist, but giving a little more transparency to their existence, I think, will be beneficial. I don't think I'm really that concerned, to be honest. Like, as long as as long as I can avoid going to war, I can't.
You might be young enough, you
complain.
get drafted.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm gonna. I'm gonna hide out in the woods somewhere.
On my part, I'm not too worried that we're all going to die in a fiery nuclear apocalypse. And my reasoning is, well, firstly, there's nothing I can do about it. But secondly, even if there was, I just have faith that humanity is not programmed to self-destruct. Whoever it is with their finger on the nuclear button, they're not only consigning themselves to death and destruction, but all of their family and everyone that they know. So even if you are Vladimir Putin or Kim Jong-un or whoever, who might be pretty crazy, there's just I just have this faith that there is some part of the human DNA sequence that just says, don't do that, guys. And humanity has been close to, the Cuban Missile Crisis. And there was that one guy who said, let's not launch the rockets. By the way, look into that if you don't know. There was some Russian guy who got ordered to fire off the nukes, and he said, no, let's just hold up a second. He saved the whole human race, right? I just think it's gonna, I'm an optimist. I think we're gonna be okay. And I think even if we destroy the whole banking cartel and everything, they'd still rather live in a world under the BCH standard than everyone dies, including them. So that's my take. But I mean, there are, like you say, there is, suicide cults is a real thing. So if the wrong person has their finger on the button, you never know, and that's a risk we're perpetually running, I guess, until we get interplanetary. So, like, with the SpaceX crew for that that kind of thing. That's not a problem I'm attacking just yet. Don't have time for it. All right, I've got a slide here, blind apes. So we've talked about a whole lot of heavy stuff, but we have to also just touch a bit on the current crypto thing of the week. There's always something going on in the crypto circus. This week, it was Yuga Labs, who famously have the Bored Apes NFT series and made a lot of money from that. They hosted a party with attendees reporting severe eye burn because they used some UVC lights to make a sort of neon atmosphere.
Oh, right.
And instead of using the regular ones that people just have at a club or whatever kind of setup, they bought the wrong ones and used some potentially industrial strength UVC light, which then burned the eyesight of at least some of the people involved into temporary, if not permanent, blindness. I don't know what the exact numbers or stats were. It was certainly quite unclear at the time of this reporting. Jet, you've got a little video here. We've got the slides. You can see the kind of neon setup that they had going there, and you can imagine these lights, and also a quick little video of these guys jumping around at Ape Fest. Charlie, you won't be able to see this, but let me just send you the link to the tweet, and you can just have a quick look at it on your other screen, or not. It's just a bunch of kids jumping around.
So, question for you guys: do you like to save and spend in Bitcoin Cash, or do you save in one, spend in something else? I've heard some people save in Bitcoin and spend Monero. They like to do it in different ways, or save in Bitcoin and then put it on refill, like on a credit card or something like that. What do you guys prefer to do?
Well, obviously the position of this podcast is that everything should just run on BCH. That's what it means, global reserve currency. Everybody in the world can transact with everybody else, or who volunteers to. It's not forced on anybody, but in the end, the network effect will make it essentially universal. And yeah, I save in BCH, spend BCH. That's it. You're only divorced from a fiat system once you've got that going. Would I be opposed to, obviously in my history in cryptocurrency, I have used various other ones here and there, not to any great extent. None of them have really caught on to me that much. I mean, the Monero community go on and on about how they've got superior privacy, and some people sort of believe, oh, okay, well, BTC is the biggest, so I'll put most of my money in there, but then I'll use some of the other more payments focused one for payments. That's also a strategy. If it gets people out of fiat currency, it gets them out of fiat currency. But my general attitude is that in the long run, once BCH starts getting a bit more traction, which it is slowly doing, like Bitcoin before the split was just taking over and there was no competitors. You didn't need any because one currency was just fine and it just worked and it was just taking off. Now in the aftermath of the split, since the guys who wanted to scale the network and keep growing lost, we've then had to rebuild. But as soon as we can get a bit more upward momentum going like we had back then, there's just no need for any other currency, really. That's my take, Jet.
Okay, so whether
do you use other ones? Do you use Monero? Do you use Litecoin? I know you've answered this on the show before, but for Charlie's benefit.
Yeah, not anymore. I don't use exchanges anymore. So if I'm going to even get another cryptocurrency, it's going to have to be for work. I'd have to be earning it in some way. And I think even in that context, I'd ask to be paid in Bitcoin Cash because I have more places that I can use Bitcoin Cash. It's just more useful for me in my day-to-day. And I'm also not too concerned about savings at all because I have a pretty decent day job. And so I have I've got multiple forms of income. And I think this is like a 20, 30, 40 year journey for me. So yeah, if I can spend it somewhere, I will. And if I can't, then that's not that big of a concern for me. And so I inevitably end up saving because there's more places I can spend my fiat than BCH. But yeah, if I could, I'd spend BCH all day, every day. I'd completely divorce from fiat.
And save it.
Yeah.
Save it only. And that's the thing. That's in the BCH community. We did a recent listener survey which showed up a trend of more and more people becoming more and more serious about BCH as the one serious alternative. Now, I know you said that there was a burger place near you where the guy was taking Bitcoin, right? And you said you might try and spend some BCH with him. Did you give it a go? How did that play out?
It was just regular Bitcoin. He didn't have Bitcoin Cash, so.
Would he take it? Did you try and convince him?
No.
Okay. All right. No, I'm fascinated. Because I said to you beforehand.
Because I go talk to people who are about this, and I was starting to try to get into it myself and see if I could help other people get into it. But no one around me uses it, and no one wanted to get into it. I'm like, well, I'm kind of barking up the wrong tree there. Can I spend my time doing something more effective? So I just went back to just talking to people about digital currencies. Got to let that go.
Yeah. But it'll come back around. But I just think it's funny because, I warned you when you said, I might try and spend BCH with him. I said to you specifically, yeah, he might react negatively to it or he might not be interested. And here's the reasons, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot sort of. I posted something on Twitter the other day, just shit posting something, right? And in my comments, these two guys went back and forth for a couple hours, just yelling at each other about these crypto arguments. And I'm like, dude, really? But they were like, no, it's gotta be this one. No, it's gotta be that one. Why would you do your way? Your way's stupid because X, Y, Z. And I'm like, you guys are so far beyond me. Yeah, it does get very tribal and in the weeds. And like you said before, it's the same divide and conquer thing. Once upon a time, the crypto community and the Bitcoin community was the same thing. It was overlapping. And now it's all been fragmented down. So, of course, we think that our way is the way everyone should and will align on. But you ask someone else, they'll say something
Well,
different.
I don't know if you like a free market in money, because money is just a store of wealth and medium of exchange. So whether that be Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Monero, or one of the other crypto anything, the market will decide which one is a good store of wealth, which one is convenient to spend. And each and every one of those is going to force everything else to be honest. So, if nobody wants US dollars anymore, or euros, or pound sterling, because people are going into crypto, then it's going to force US dollars to actually be worth something. And that's a great way to reform a fiat currency system, if other people just start ignoring it.
I think there's a lot of reason to believe, too, that the people in the comments that are arguing back and forth about this and that being the right way to do, like, those are people that are also, I would assume, be more interested in accumulating more fiat dollars than bringing adoption of those cryptocurrencies, unless the adoption means that number go up. So the distinction here, I think, is, we're aligned because we see fiat and that the fiat system as a common enemy, whereas I think a lot of people involved in crypto are like, how do I make more dollars?
Oh, right.
Right. So just back on this Blind Apes thing before we move on, the reason that I bring it up is because there was people, again, on Twitter kind of getting in there, haha, these guys are so stupid. We told them, not we told them, but like, of course, these idiots that believe in these stupid monkey pictures are then going to do some stupid stuff. But when you look at the video, it's literally just like a bunch of young men in a warehouse, like in their 20s, like jumping around, having a good time. So, yeah, okay, there was obviously some incompetence there, and I really hope and nobody went permanently blind. But the reason it also got on my radar, I thought it was worth mentioning here, is because to get people's attention, sometimes you need to pair a serious message with something fun and interesting and cool, some artwork or some music or just some culture. If it's all just this dry sort of political theory stuff, it's only going to hit so many people that are interested to take the time out of their day in that regard. So I wondered, if you could just give us some thoughts from your perspective, how you see the crypto industry, especially stuff like this, and also whether you think there's any utility in your message or in our message or in anything like that, being more proactive about adding art and culture to spreading otherwise, strong message.
Between Twitter and like just me walking around, I do try to make it fun and interesting. I don't want to be just like Mr. Bahumbug anytime I walk in and talk to someone, because nobody wants to hang out with that. And for anyone who like knows me or been watching my Twitter account or whatever, I mean, it's obvious like I'm not like a crypto bro or a professional in any of this stuff. I'm happy to say that I totally get schooled by a bunch of people. My whole thing was honestly just trying to get normal people like into the mix. Whether that is learning about digital surveillance or getting involved in school boards or city councils or sheriff's races, whatever it is, just get more and more and more people paying attention. Because the single biggest problem that I have seen and still see is so many people are lethargic and clueless and don't even know that there's even a problem. And if right at that point somebody inserts a whole bunch of convenience and universal basic income, free money as long as you sign up, come get your retinal scan and we'll give you 10 free world coins or whatever.
I'm so glad you mentioned it.
Like, how many people are going to go for that? People are going to go for that. So for me, it's just a matter of like, let's just have grassroots, face-to-face, go talk to people in your own neighborhood, your family, your friends, people at the liquor store where you go anyway, and just be like, hey, there's a thing going on. Here's what it looks like. Can I help you out with cash, Bitcoin, whatever? And just getting people like aware that there's actually a problem. Because I trust that like, if we lived in a world filled with psychopaths, like we're dead. There's no hope. Unfortunately, most people aren't psychopaths. They just don't know. So I just want like a whole society filled with like people actually understanding that there's actually a problem. Like, 1776, and people could look at, British troops just walking into your house because they felt like it. Now we just have American troops walking into your bank account because they feel like it. It's the same thing in a digital realm, and just get people going, oh, paradigm shift. I got it. This is an information war. This is digital war. Boom. And then now normal people can act in their own best interest. They can adopt Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, whatever. They can get involved in however they want to get involved. You just have that many more people, just a mass of people actually working together. It's kind of the connectedness of the internet is really interesting, because I've connected with people in like France and Germany because they're having the same battle as you guys in the UK, whatever. And there's actually I think it's kind of funny. There's a global proletariat forming with normal people throughout the world, right? Who are into Bitcoin or whatever, just into being free people, who are actually telling these Marxist douchebags to go to hell. And it's just lovely to see it happening, just see from throughout the world being oh no, the British and the Germans, and be yeah, that's fun at the soccer match or football match, right? But in real life, nobody has a beef. You're more than happy to help someone out, get into Bitcoin or whatever, and live like a normal person.
Yeah, exactly. It's always funny what unites things, and the powerful against the rest. The 1% occupy Wall Street. It's a tale as old as time itself. Really, go back.
And if we're busy yelling at the corporations which aren't actually a thing, if we're busy yelling at this thing or that thing, if you're yelling at some race or some ethnicity or some immigrant or some corporation, you're not yelling at an actual person who's actually behind the problem that you're facing. So it's really easy to say they, them, and the corporations and Wall Street, but that doesn't actually solve anything. All it does is you're spinning your wheels and wasting your time and energy. You actually have to go, okay, what do I do as an individual person to actually, do something positive? And a lot of times that's just going out and talking to your community and going there's actually a problem going on here. Let's talk about it, and that's huge. That's huge.
Yeah, you mentioned information warfare. Obviously, we're veterans of that with a weekly segment called Meme of the Week. This week, it's from Elon Musk, who has made a Twitter post, which is called Best Economist Ever. It has an image with a quote here which says, "I do not think it is an exaggeration to say history is largely a history of inflation. Usually inflation's engineered by government for the gain of governments," end quote. F.A. Hayek, the famous economist, and next to it, he has a picture of Salma Hayek with her breasts half hanging out of her top to obviously grab people's attention on their Twitter feed, and it's got nearly 50 million views. This one post. So this made me laugh when I saw it. This is actually a classic. Sal the Agorist is another Twitter account, and he regularly does these kind of posts with Salma Hayek specifically, actually, and lots of these quotes and so forth. But
they're all F.A. Hayek quotes with Salma Hayek.
Yeah, he does some other ones too, where he makes it completely. There's not even a joke about that. It'll be like Taylor Swift, but then the quote will be from some, ancient philosopher or something like that. The visual just gets people to stop and check it out. It's funny how our brains are wired like that. But this one really made me laugh, and it also just made me realize the story is getting out there as much as the situation kind of seems bad when you see this European IDs rolling out and so on and so forth, especially during coronavirus. That was pretty brutal, but there's the flame is still there, and more people than you expect are kind of getting the message. That's what I take away from this. Jeff,
well, one of the very notable, I don't know, thing that came to my mind is during COVID, over here in the United States, we know the vax mandates were a push for digital ID. And over here, about 20% of the people just opted out and they said, no, I don't need it. I don't want it. I'll take you to court. I'll fight it. Fire me, whatever. I'm not doing it. And it fell flat. And that's going to be just kind of like any political term in terms of anybody's country. You get about 20% of the people that are just going to opt out, who know what's going on. It's going to fall flat. And so if you can manage something like that in, say, Europe, UK, whatever, you don't need everybody on Bitcoin. You don't need everybody paying attention. You just need to get to the point where you got enough people who can say, nope, I'm opting out. I'm not doing this system that you're trying to impose here. We're doing our own thing over here. We have our parallel economy. We have our doctors, nurses, ranchers, farmers, teachers, whatever. We're homeschool our kid. We're not doing your new way. And then, the support saying you only have one choice, it's the new system. That support just keeps dwindling and dwindling and dwindling. And then the alternative system grows and grows and grows. And it also forces the people pushing this on us to get more draconian on the next one, which is going to wake up that many more people. So it's one of those things, like every time you can get someone to be thinking about digital surveillance or adopt Bitcoin or talk to their kids about civil rights, whatever it is, every one of those battles adds up, and you're just bringing one more person to your side of the ledger. Keep pulling them over one at a time. And whatever happens in 2024, you got that many more people on your side, that many more people in your circle of friends, that many people in your your network, your support network, and you just keep doing that every day.
I have something way less serious. Like this meme just takes me back to middle school, dude, where it's like, oh, that's got my attention. And then there's this existential moment of like, I don't know, what am I more attracted to here? Is it the imagery? Is it the ideology? Is it the potential for other people to like kind of be exposed to the concepts? But I'm also just a curiosity for my own sake. I want to know the demographics of this tweet specifically. I want to know the gender breakdown of people who are liking it, bookmarking it, sharing it. Age breakdown would also be super cool. Is there a community note on this?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I've got the tag there that says rate proposed community notes because I got into community notes to be one of the people rating it because I wanted to get myself prepared in case at some point some big BDC person is going to put up some serious misinfo. And if I can just jam like the white paper or something into the community notes, that would be brilliant. But then I took my phone number off Twitter because you can get SIM swapped and you can get hacked if you have it. But then you take it off, then you can't write into community notes. So I've got it, but I can't even write on it. So that seems like a bit of a bug that needs to be fixed. But anyway.
I was wondering what possible community note could be on this.
Well, it could be, Salma Hayek did not say this. It's a misleading attribution, But anyway, that's the joke. People get that. All right, we got one more meme of the week too, because I couldn't find a good community comment of the week. So, guys, you got to up your game. Nobody really said anything great this week. This one is Terminator. I started researching CBDC on the left, Sarah Connor right, and then 6 weeks later, it's like geared up, ready to fight with the BCH and going to war. This is kind of how it feels to me. I don't know about you, but this is what you're handing out, those stickers, right? The piece of paper. People are going to be like, yeah, haha, yeah, I'm reading this, and then it's like, oh yeah. Serious. Do you get anybody that comes back to you and is like, no, I'm full down the rabbit hole?
I've ran into a few people who know what's going on. Honestly, like there's so many people who just don't want to get involved. So many people just want to like hang out on the sidelines. And honestly, that's me too. I'd rather just go hide in a cave somewhere. I mean, if I had my choice, I'd be living out in a cabin in the woods. You'd never hear from me again. So I don't know. No, not too many crazy people. Honestly, it's harder to kind of get people involved, and that's kind of why I was trying to make it like really easy to say, look, if there's something going on, you can't expect everybody else to do the heavy lifting. Do something.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, we got our second last slide. Every guest on this show gets a message to the community where they can just free talk, whatever opinion, idea, bit of advice or story that they think the Bitcoin Cash community at large or the viewers of this podcast needs to hear. So if you could say anything to the Bitcoin Cash community, what do they need to hear?
Go get involved face to face, talking to people. If you think I'm wrong, go tell everyone where you think I'm wrong. If you think I'm right, go tell all your family and friends where you think I'm right. We don't get out of this by people tweeting on, sitting on Twitter, sitting at home behind their screens. We get out of this. We move to someplace better by people sitting down face to face, sorting this out, making friends, working together, finding a way forward. And that you can't beat face to face conversation.
Yeah, exactly. So nothing beats good sit down. I'm partial to having a nice non-alcoholic beer as well too. But any kind of drink, any kind of beverage will usually also aid things in the right direction in that regard. So yeah, get in people's face, talk to them face to face. Right. Supporter appreciation for the show. Thank you very much to our donators. Thank you very much to our patrons, Ricky and HP. Thank you to our sponsors, General Protocols. Check out bchbull.com. And we don't have any flipstarter shout outs because, as you heard, if you're not paying for it, you're the product. So time to chip in some sats on the Flipstarter. Otherwise, you guys are going to be the product. I'm going to sell you the fuck out. I'm just joking. It's all good. It's all good. The revolution is priceless. But a few sats definitely wouldn't help. So Thank you, everybody, for watching. We've got the start guide, FAQ, links at www.bitcoincashpodcast.com. If you're new to the show, listen to episode 85. That will break down and explain all of what's going on here. And final shout outs, Charlie, where can people find more of you? And is there anything else you want to specifically shout out?
Website is www.resistcbdc.com. I've got a download page there with just like letters you can send to a politician, newspaper, whatever, where it's already kind of pre-written, nice, easy format. It's all free. I'm not scanning or tracking anybody. And then Twitter's resist_CBDC.
Yeah, you're pretty active on there, and you've got actually pretty good reach. So I highly recommend people follow you there. Jet, do you have any shout outs this week? No shout outs. And what shout outs do I have? I never like to sort of pass up the opportunity. I'll give a shout out to anybody who was at there's a screenshot on one of these slides earlier here, the P2P discussion slide, where I was in Bournemouth Square and I saw a bunch of people, this was last year, protesting the social credit system, and they were doing the same thing. They were handing out flyers and there were people getting involved and asking questions. And honestly, it was a bit of a motley brigade. Like it wasn't necessarily the world's most well-organized or compelling thing in my view, but they were out there, they were handing it out. And it really, I picked up one of those flyers. I didn't stop to talk to them all about it, but it was just great to see that the revolution is happening grassroots, and people are there and people know, and maybe it's not that easy to see in your day-to-day life because, like you're saying, if nobody's talking about it, then nobody else talks about it, and then it becomes sort of a taboo topic or silent in that regard. But I think, yeah, we are winning, and people are getting the message, waking up about inflation and about surveillance. So if everybody just keeps fighting the good fight, we'll come out on top. I believe that. All right. Also, thank you. Yeah, go on.
Veterans Day.
Oh, Veterans Day.
And you guys are having your celebration at the Cenotaph, right? Is it the Cenotaph, the big memorial in London?
I assume so. Yeah. I'm
Okay.
not an expert on British veterans, but yeah. Okay. Shout out to anybody.
Your version of Veterans Day, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, my dad's active in the Australian military,
Okay.
so yeah, anybody in the military who's out there and is one of the good guys as well.
Thank you, guys.
Shout out to them. Thank you for your service. All right, cool. Well, that will do it for the show. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and until next time.
So I started realizing that if you can just find strength just a little bit longer, you will have a crew of people following you along the way.
And that is another thing that no one can ever teach you. Because you're going to have to learn that on your own. You're going to have to figure out how to pull that energy out of your mind on your own. There's no book you can read that all of a sudden I have it. I've got the technique now. I know how to do it.
Yeah.
No, it's a grind that you have to start and finish on your own.